Cyclone Tej and Lola limber up for impacts on tonight's tropical weather bulletin. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical weather bulletin for October 23rd. So a very busy picture around the world right now, with no less than 6 active tropical cyclones of varying strengths. 72 storms now on the score sheet for this year, and we are code orange mainly for Cyclone Tej, which is nearing the Arabian Peninsula. Tammy is clearing away from the Lesser Antilles and all warnings have been lifted. It's still a hurricane with 80-mile-per-hour winds, and we're looking at another area of interest which we're now giving a 40% chance that could spin up quickly just off the coast of Nicaragua. In the Eastern Pacific, Norma is slowly weakening and Otis has formed as well in the eastern region there, and is likely to remain rather weak as it slowly gets closer to the coast of Mexico. Norma actually re-intensified slightly, but really does appear to be on its way out now at this point. In the Western Pacific, we have designated one area of interest now, a low chance for the time being in the next 7 days, that will be patrolling through the lower latitudes there as it heads towards the Philippine Sea. A tropical depression which is moving through the Bay of Bengal at this time and is likely to become a tropical storm fairly soon. And we also have, of course, Cyclone Tej, which is the strongest storm active right now around the world and is a category 2 with severe rain impacts likely for the border region between Yemen and Oman. We also have Cyclone Lola, which is the next biggest threat, I would say, at this point, which is obviously threatening Vanuatu with powerful, strong winds, could get to category 3 status later on, and very heavy rainfall. Let's first look at Tammy then. Here's its current position. It's 313 kilometers from San Juan, Puerto Rico, 785 from Coburn Town, 1354 from Bermuda, 1502 from Nassau, and 2043 from Cape Hatteras. Interesting to see the progression of this storm's forecast. NHC expect that it will turn post-tropical before the 5-day period, and what's left of it could end up moving on towards the west and could end up reaching perhaps even down towards the Bahamas and even further towards the southwest. We do get some erratic paths at this time of year. Here's Tej. It's 178 kilometers from Socotra, 210 from Haswain, 254 from Al-Qaeda, 268 from Dalkut, and 307 from Salalah. All of these locations could receive significant impacts and very high amounts of rain near the coastal region there around the border between Oman and Yemen. A few localities in that region that could receive very high amounts of rain, which will cause flooding and of course landslides in this very arid part of the world. And this is Lola right now. There are cyclone warnings for eastern Torba and the northern tip of Maewo in Vanuatu, and a cyclone watch in effect for a few provinces, the rest of Pinama, Sanma, and most of Malampa in Vanuatu. It is just 66 kilometers from the tiny island of Tikopia, 245 from Vanuatu, 407 from Luganville, 590 from Port Vila, and 1128 from Noumea in New Caledonia. All of these locations are probably going to receive some kind and form of storm force winds and possibly very heavy rainfall. So a lot to look at on the satellite imagery. Well, this is Tej right now. It had a double eye wall feature for a time there. It looks like the inner one has dissolved at this point. It's quite hard to see on this imagery. It's got about 30-minute intervals, I think, but gradually moving northwestwards and still has a lot of power in it there. A strong category 2 that we have it marked down as right now, and still possibly the chance that it could intensify just a slight bit before it gets towards land. Now this is Lola, looking pretty good on this satellite imagery right now. A large eye starting to appear, and it really got that sorted out very quickly in the last 12 hours since we did our last update on this storm, when it was really blowing up. But here it is right now with the eye feature appearing and really circling around with those massive convective bursts, really looking impressive. Now this is Norma, which is not looking very impressive anymore, but still has some strong winds attached, but it really is getting sheared to oblivion at this point as it moves closer to the coast of Mexico, with that convection really starting to wane. Tammy is also struggling with wind shear, and you can see it here on this imagery. It's somehow holding on to hurricane status and is still blowing up really deep convection near the center. Most of the cloud and rain now is leaving the Lesser Antilles. And this is a quick look at Otis, not looking that great so far. Weak rotation, if I do say so, at the higher levels. And this is a very quick look at that Bay of Bengal area of interest, tropical depression, which may well be a tropical storm pretty damn soon. Eastern Pacific then, where we've got both of these storms. They are over warm sea surface temperatures, 28 degrees plus. Otis maybe not quite so hot. In the Atlantic, looking good in the Caribbean, but where Tammy is right now, it's still holding on to around 29-30 degrees Celsius. And even though it will remain over 26 degrees waters for the whole period, it still looks like it's going to turn post-tropical by day 4 or 5. But those warm waters theoretically extend almost as far as Bermuda. Western Pacific still looking very good at the lower latitudes, well above 30 degrees Celsius in the Philippine Sea and around the Philippine Islands themselves, and also out further east. South China Sea getting pretty chilly in the northern reaches now, and that will continue to affect those any storms in those areas. Bay of Bengal, very warm for that system, 30 degrees Celsius, and actually off the coast of Oman and Yemen, not quite as hot as I was thinking, but still 28 to 29 degrees Celsius, which is decent. Southwest Indian Ocean, that heat building in now as well, a little bit further along the east coast of Madagascar towards the Mascarene Islands, and it's also starting to come together for the Australian region as well. Coral Sea always takes a little bit longer to warm up, but looking towards the rest of the South Pacific, where Lola is right now, those temperatures are looking good, 28 degrees plus, and those 26 degrees Celsius extend down towards the southern islands of Vanuatu. Western Pacific quite a bit above average, as is the Arabian Sea. Bay of Bengal closer to average, and the South Pacific not far away from average as well. Eastern Pacific is hit and miss, as well as the El Nino effect in the very equatorial areas, and in the Atlantic it's the Caribbean that's well above average. Still time for a late season surprise over there, which could cause problems. Oceanic heat content is still sky high in the Atlantic, although not quite where those two systems are. Tammy, yes, it's got quite a bit there, but that other system near Nicaragua, it's just a little bit too far south actually. The Eastern Pacific looks like it's pretty much finished now for the oceanic heat content, but still possibly some slow developers like Otis, and in the Western Pacific still looking pretty good off the coast of the Philippines. So let's check the GFS computer model then for the next 5 days. This is what it develops out of Tammy and that other area of interest, which becomes a tropical storm there. Watch both of these. Tammy there getting back to hurricane status if it did lose it, and then weakening again later on and starting to dissolve. But look down towards the south there, near Nicaragua there, a brief spin up, that's a tropical storm, maybe 50 mph winds on that GFS run. Models are hit and miss on that right now, and I would probably give it, well, 40% chance I think is fair, maybe 50. In the Eastern Pacific, we're looking at Norma dying out there as it moves inland over Mexico, pretty straightforward. Still got high winds though. And as for Otis, well, it's barely noticeable here on this model run up until the very end of the 5-day period, when it starts to blow up a little bit near the coast of Guerrero, and then eventually starts to move along the coastline by the looks of things towards the end of that 5-day period. So Otis is going to remain very weak, but still could do something near the end. Now there's Tej making landfall along the coast, and it looking more likely that it will have hurricane force winds by the time it does that, and we just saw the Bay of Bengal system there as well, tropical storm weakening to a depression before it reaches the Ganges River Delta area and probably quite close to Chattogram. But looking in very close now for Tej, it is looking more like a landfall in Yemen now, and that means a more stronger landfall, maybe even still a category 2 by the time it does so. So we're definitely concerned about those winds, but also the very heavy rain. And this is Lola. You can see it here moving down towards the southwest, curving and bending, and then swiveling off towards the southeast later on and affecting New Caledonia. GFS there looks like it's predicting a peak probably category 2 on the Saffir Simpson scale. JTWC earlier forecasted a category 3 peak, could still happen, but eventually it will weaken quite quickly after it passes Vanuatu, and very little left of it by the time it moves through New Caledonia, but still quite stormy. And this is the rainfall projection for the Cyclone Tej right now. Just want to point out Vanuatu still we're expecting maybe 24 inches of rain in some places in the eastern islands. That's 600 millimeters. But here along the coast of Yemen and Oman, still very high amounts as well. Similar amounts actually, probably getting to 24 inches along the coastline there on the Yemen side, and then that could be over 600 millimeters. So very high amounts of rain expected from this storm over areas that obviously are quite vulnerable, so could potentially be a very serious situation, and that's why it's code orange. But thankfully, possibly, it's not a huge area being impacted there. It's just a very small part of the coast, but could implicate quite a lot of populations. Longer range, day 5 to 10. Very quickly, Otis dies off near the coast, and maybe regenerates slightly actually. But what's left of Tammy makes it through to western Cuba, and you can still see the center of circulation entering the western Caribbean near the Yucatan Channel there off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula by the end of that 10-day period. Could it be a regeneration of that storm much later on in the model run? Well, I don't know about that, probably not, but it will be interesting to watch exactly how that progresses. Western Pacific in the longer range as well. It feels like it's been fairly quiet for the Philippines, but there could be something on the way later on here towards the end of this run. Another typhoon that's starting to blow up and could get potentially strong near the end of that 10-day period. I think that might even be the thing that we've given that 10% to, eventually developing much more strongly. I think it is towards the end of that period there, outside of that 7-day range. Scan the barcode and that will take you to the Force 13 merch store, where we have all our usual items for your per usual, and also our full season individual storm animations, and are still waiting for Hone t-shirts, are still waiting for you. In the silly range then, day 10 to 16, what happens to this typhoon? Well, it gets very strong, and a landfall in Luzon there, Isabela province, possibly as a category 4, and then it survives that crossing and affects Taiwan again, harassing that area, and then it gets blown away by some of those winds that are coming up from the northeast. So could be a late season big storm here, but one that wouldn't last very long as a powerful typhoon, and then just being a nuisance towards the end of that period there, dying off on the 7th by the looks of things. And what's this? The South Pacific could throw up a second system maybe? Well, there it is. The GFS is predicting that right now in the super long range. First time we've seen this, but we'll see whether that comes to fruition or not. Forecasting a category 1 equivalent there, but only hovering off the coastline of Vanuatu, away from the islands mainly. So it doesn't look like that one will be a land threat, but of course things can change a heck of a lot during this period. That is 2 weeks out. You can talk about all of this on our Discord server, discord.gg/force13 for tropical weather and general weather chat, with thousands of members from all around the world. Well, goodness me, that was a lot to cover tonight. Well, on this day, we certainly had our hands full as well. In 2015, 8 years ago, it was none other than the legendary peak of Hurricane Patricia. How strong exactly was it is still a question mark for everyone who observed it now and at the time. I have pretty much surmised it was probably 205 miles per hour and a pressure of around 871 millibars. We also had Hurricane Olaf, which was a category 3, and Typhoon Champy, which was also a category 3 in the Western Pacific. Of course, the little lore there from Patricia on that day, the 23rd, I actually left for vacation on that day, just after I finished a live stream when it reached 200 miles per hour. You can watch that back as well, incredible. In the Atlantic, the next name on the list is Vince. In the Eastern Pacific, it's now Pillar, and in the Central Pacific, it's still Hone. 72 storms so far this year. In the Western Pacific, the next name is Jelawat, and in the North Indian Ocean, it will be Hamoon, and that could be upon us pretty soon as well. It's certainly being forecasted by the IMD. In the Southern Hemisphere, the Australian region, Jasper's next up. The Southwest Indian Ocean starts with Alvaro, and in the South Pacific, the next name now is Mau. That's all from tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. We'll be back again tomorrow night.